welcome to week 14. It's Audible Live, Sigmund Bloom. And I waited for Matt Waldman to chew, breathe, and swallow this time. Although we still got to get that freeze of the bowl. And joining us tonight, Soup Bowl. We got a game. It's week 14. We got 6 teams on bye. So the topic we're going to be diving into tonight, at least some, are who are some of the players that you normally would not start, but maybe you might start this week. In a very important fantasy football week. Thanks, NFL, for 6 teams on bye in a very important fantasy football week. I opine this week that we need somebody that represents fantasy. Maybe Bob Harris, Jeff, to represent us, the fantasy football community at 345 Park, so that they don't do things like this to us. Because, hey, we're putting food on the plate for the NFL. Let's put some NFL takes on video pixel hard drives, whatever it is. Jeff, what's going on in the Raiders and the Rams? Not the best combination. Is there any fantasy goodness here?
You're getting a little bit of goodness. You're getting Josh Jacobs doing Josh Jacob things. He's got a touchdown. He's up over 50 yards rushing. So you're getting that RB1 that you've come to expect out of Josh Jacobs. A little bit of action from Devontae Adams, like you would hope, but there's still meat on the bone there. He's had a couple long passes from Derek Carr. Derek Carr is not giving you any touchdowns on this short week. He just had a red zone interception, and they've stalled out twice in the red zone. So that's why it's 13-3, and this really feels like this could be a Raiders runaway, but they stall out in the red zone, or they do just enough that the Rams are just kind of hanging around. But you're not getting much out the Rams end.
No. You start a Ram with anything on the line of fantasy football, you get what you deserved, at least this version of the Rams. We are seeing Baker Mayfield get a chance at career reclamation. A lot of talk about how he's only been there for 48 hours, and look how long the play calls are, and look at how hard he's worked. It's unprecedented how hard he's worked. And he looks okay. He looks better than John Walford. Matt, real quick, since Baker Mayfield, it's maybe the most relevant Baker Mayfield will be for the rest of his career. I don't know. We had a good conversation, a Twitter conversation, whenever Baker Mayfield asked for his release. What have we learned? Other than listen to Matt Waldman, which really was the most common response. What have we learned from Baker Mayfield going number 1? Now that we can look back, when we dissect that, I thought you had a really good answer.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to consider is that a lot of what happened with Baker Mayfield was on the strength of his statistical accuracy. People were blown away by the statistical accuracy that he had at Oklahoma. And we have to remember that statistical accuracy doesn't necessarily reflect projected accuracy for the NFL. And so you have to understand that you have to grade accuracy to the NFL threshold. And sometimes that goes with charting quarterbacks as opposed to just looking at the box score stats. So that makes a difference, because with the guys like Baker Mayfield and Zach Wilson and Drew Lock and a lot of names, they often are accurate for the college game, but that's because the receivers often have 2 to 3 steps when they're wide open, as opposed to having maybe half their frame open. And the accuracy stats don't show that. Another thing is that he didn't really own the pocket very well. And in Oklahoma, and in Texas A&M, you could see that all over the place, that he could buy time in the pocket because he only faced a defender or two every game or every other game who was an NFL caliber athlete, where if he drifted outside his protection sphere, it didn't hurt him as much as it would on a play-in, play-out basis as it hurt him in the NFL. And then I think the other thing is just to understand that, 1 or 2 games and what a team will show as an opponent in the college game can make a difference if it projects well for the NFL. And you could argue, and I wouldn't say it's a great argument, like I wouldn't base my entire scouting report on it, but it was certainly one where you could look at the University of Georgia's defense in that Rose Bowl game and see that when they let Baker Mayfield do what he did against all the Big 12 teams in the first half of that game, he looked like the Baker Mayfield that everybody was comparing to Drew Brees, Brett Favre, and Russell Wilson somehow combined into this beautiful mixture. And then in the second half, Georgia said, yeah, we're going to play man-to-man and stick to him and see if he can actually make throws when we heighten the pocket, the edges. And Baker Mayfield looked like the Baker Mayfield that we see today, which is a guy that sometimes has some good moments, but overall isn't a consistent starter in the NFL. And when that type of cocktail in the second half for Georgia presented the environment that projected best to the NFL compared to the other teams that he saw.
Yeah, the principle that comes up and maybe Matt, this can be another frontier of innovation with the RSP, is that not every play in college is created equal for probative value in projecting a player for the NFL. And there's probably how many plays, what percentage of plays could you just throw out, Matt? I mean, I'm not even talking about a Lincoln Riley offense. I mean, just in a typical player that you throw out. How many plays just have no probative value?
Well, I think that really what it comes down to is that we don't know how to weigh the value that it exists within the play, because it's I think at the end of the day, and this is what the RSP, I mean, what I try to do and I've been working towards for 18 years now, which is that when you look at a player, if you're looking at the right criteria within the play, it doesn't matter whether the outcome was good or bad. It matters whether the process was good or bad. And with Baker Mayfield or Darren McFadden or Felix Jones, oftentimes, or Drew Lock, you'd see that the process was bad, but the result was good enough. And people thought, well, it'll get better. But, they're not looking at those things. You could say Will Levis and Anthony Richardson are good examples of that this year, if people are interested in that, because Anthony Richardson's a guy who's getting a lot of kind of like mixed messages about him, but in the things that I think I value that translate to the NFL, I would put him light years ahead of Will Levis, who a lot of people are like he could be a top 10 prospect to begin the year. And some of that is they valued that Rich Scangarello, former NFL quarterback coach, is now his quarterback coach. That he has a big arm, that he can make throws that Zach Wilson made in pro days. But when it comes to actually reading defenses, manipulating defenses, and playing in a way where that you have to for the NFL within control, Anthony Richardson is light years ahead of Will Levis, even though the perception isn't that way. So that's the thing. You can also have players who perform poorly statistically,
right?
And that's the thing. So, and I would put it this way: even
Josh Allen.
Yes, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, two good examples. You could look at things with Josh Allen's game and you would see a bad play and you'd say, see, that's not going to fly in the NFL. But you would say, that's fine. That was, if you look at it and say, well, that's one play out of 10 that he did poorly like that. And yes, it happened at the end of the game. But let's not call him a choke artist or that he falls apart because of one play when he did 9 plays well, just like that before, or that Patrick Mahomes had a rough game against LSU. And I remember an analyst who I respect a lot. I don't want to say who it is because I think he was saying it more for that game, not characterizing the entire player scouting report. But he said things like that game by Patrick Mahomes against LSU was not even an NFL caliber. Like he wouldn't be an NFL caliber prospect on the basis of that game. If you just looked at it alone, but he didn't look at it alone. But that's the point. Sometimes we weigh too much there. And sometimes you just have to look at a bad play and say, it was just a moment of immaturity. Like things I've seen Anthony Richardson doing, the same things I've seen Matthew Stafford do at Georgia, both good and bad. And the one moment where he makes a reflexive throw doesn't discount the fact that he does like 5 or 10 plays that I haven't seen anybody else do on the level of manipulation and placement. So it's it's those types of things that, if you have weighted scoring with defined criteria, it makes it easier towards to get to that point where you can value things on a level with perspective.
And what strikes me, and I remember when you and I used to talk player evaluation a lot more when I was more deep. I wasn't neck deep like you. I was maybe knee deep.
We were both getting into the pool at that time.
Yeah, we were in the pool.
We were enjoying the pool.
Yeah, and I would always say, especially for quarterbacks, show me his worst game. Let's start with his worst game because that's when you're going to learn the most about him. And I remember when I used to write up offensive linemen, one of the most important things was recovery ability. I want to know what you do when you're initially beat. And for quarterbacks, I think it was similar. What do you do when everything doesn't go as planned? And all those plays when things go as planned don't really show you that much about the quarterback. Okay, Let's get back to the matter at hand. It was week 16. Week 16, week 14, week 16 coming up. Week 14, 6 teams on bye. That's why my brain did that. Jeff, let's just we'll start with quarterback, and I just want to get your temperature check on some players if people are looking at them. So, we can put 2 players next to each other, and you tell me who you take. All right.
Great.
And now, quarterback isn't as interesting as running back, wide receiver, and tight end because Justin Fields is the only fantasy quarterback of note. Although you might be scuffling. I'm going to start Brock Purdy in one league where I'm going to the playoffs. My quarterback's Aaron Rodgers. Don't make fun of me. But so I'll give you an either or here. Ready? Deshaun Watson at Cincinnati or Tyler Huntley at Pittsburgh.
So I've got Huntley right above him in my rankings, one spot ahead. And, that really comes into just how bad Watson probably looked last week versus I think Huntley, we've seen him play efficient before. And I think that's going to be a game script that'll be favorable for Huntley against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think here's the problem with Deshaun Watson. He's rusty. Did you see what he said? I don't know when it's going to come back.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I know he doesn't actually know, but but at Cincinnati, there's not many pass defenses. They made Patrick Mahomes frustrated last week. There's not many pass defenses doing better right now than Cincinnati. With Tyler Huntley now, to be fair, Tyler Huntley, week 18 last year, Steelers needed to beat him to go to the playoffs, and they did. He only threw for 140-ish yards, threw 2 picks, did run for 70 yards. So that's why Tyler Huntley is a little safer play here, although a floor game is possible there too. But that's where we're at. These quarterbacks are ranked in that like 13 to 18 range. So depending on who you're going with, then you might be looking at one of these guys. All right. Let's shift to running back. And we'll get more than just 2 players at running back. Matt, I'll give you an either or this week because I was doing the rankings this week. And boy, it doesn't take long to get to the options at wide receiver and running back. We're like, wow, I guess people are going to be thinking about starting this player this week.
Yes.
And it's an important week. It's a week that you might need to win this week to get in the playoffs. And you might be depending on, well, let's talk about some of this. Let's just do a temperature check. And I'm not going to give you an either or here. Would you be more inclined if someone was looking at Raheem Mostert this week? Would you be more inclined to say, hey, it's the Chargers run defense. He was the guy that got about 70% of the snaps. So you roll with that because you know it can be a week winner. Or do you say, come on, it's Raheem Mostert. How long is he going to stay on the field? What has he really done of consequence with consistency this year? Are you more going to give people that nudge or grab them by the collar and say, no, I'm going to try to save your season?
Yeah, I'm going to grab him by the collar and tell them to save their season and not doubt him.
Okay.
Because, yeah, that narrative makes sense on the larger perspective. But from a game-by-game perspective, he's a good NFL running back who's getting snaps against a bad defense. And, yes, Jeff Wilson's there. But whenever Raheem Mostert's in the game, he plays well.
Yeah, I have him as running back 16 this week, actually. So I'm with you. I'm with you there. Jeff, how do we feel about Dante Foreman this week? Assuming he's going to play. He said he's 95% going to play. Our beloved Dr. Gene would say, well, then that means it's lower because players always inflate that number. But we'll know. It's an afternoon game, so you might not have a chance to completely wait around for him. But hopefully we'll know going into the week. It's Dante Foreman. He has been the true boom-bust play. Do you see more boom or bust at Seattle?
I like a boom against Seattle. Just the injury makes me a little bit nervous, but we know that Carolina is going to run the football. That's what they're going to do, and even if they fall out of it, I think they're still going to try to run the football, and he's going to be the lead guy on that.
Okay, let's move on. And who else are going to get in? I see they're talking about Travis Homer in the chat room, so let's talk about Travis Homer, Matt. I don't think Ken Walker's going to play. I don't think DJ Dallas is going to play. I don't think they want Tony Jones touching the ball. We know that Travis Homer at least has some explosive plays as a receiver. It is Carolina. Carolina's defense is underrated. This could be a game, maybe Geno Smith just throws the ball 40 times in this game. Maybe Seattle doesn't run the ball more than 10 or 15 times in this game. But how excited are we to pick Travis Homer up? Some people are looking at the waiver wire and saying, I might have to start a running back off of the waiver wire. Is he the guy?
Man, right now, I would wait probably until the last possible moment to consider a Seattle back, because not only should we be thinking about Tony Jones as a possible option right now, but they did add Wayne Gallman to the practice squad, who's a good straight ahead runner and catches the ball well.
Am I remembering that correctly? Has he been with the team before? Am I remembering that correctly?
He might have been. There's also Godwin Ikwebike, who showed some stuff at Detroit. And then there's that guy, Darwin Thompson, who I remember liking a fair bit, who is also on their practice squad and has been on their squad the longest. But then again, because they've put Tony Jones already in the backfield ahead of him, he's probably not going to get that chance. But Wayne Gallman or Ikwabige could very well be guys that we find out Saturday are going to get activated from the practice squad. And if that happens, then that might be a mess for a guy like Tony Jones and Travis Homer, because I don't think they want Travis Homer running up the middle either. They want, they're going to throw him the ball, but they're going to need somebody to be able to at least have some semblance of a run game. And the best guy is either going to be Gallman or Tony Jones. And I'd say Tony Jones, if you need someone just to hold on to for now, do him, but you better watch that waiver. You better watch the news and see if they activate Gallman, because if they do, that might be the guy.
He was with San Francisco, not Seattle, just the practice squad. Atlanta, Minnesota, Kansas City. Even he's on Kansas City's practice squad earlier this year. And the Giants, of course, where he started out. I like that advice. And one of the most underrated things, and it's a small thing about getting some fantasy football information or reading the tea leaves, are those practice squad activations on Saturday. It's relatively new, the unlimited practice squad, the 2 activations. I think they get 3 times they get to activate a player before they have to decide whether to sign him or not. I know the Ravens just finally signed Deshaun Jackson, for instance. And it's interesting because it can give you insight into injuries. It can give you insight into players that they trust. There are players that aren't even on the active roster on Friday, like Tevin Coleman, who had 2 touchdowns, I think, when he got called up earlier this year for San Francisco. And we were wondering if he was going to get called up, and Jordan Mason's taking advantage of that opportunity. Okay, Jeff, another running back that folks are considering or might be considering. And I know this from my Matt Waldman RSP, that he's a good pass catcher. And he, as far as I know, he's the first good pass catching back whose nickname is Bam, because that's not something that makes you think of catching passes. It's Zonovan Knight. Michael Carter is back this week. Robert Saleh, they asked him, what about Zonovan Knight? He's not going anywhere. So if he was in your lineup last week, should he go somewhere or should he stay?
I keep him in the lineup, and I look at that wide zone scheme, and I think he's the back most qualified on that roster to run in that wide zone scheme. He's an explosive back. He can make plays upfield. I really liked him coming into the process. I was kind of surprised, disappointed where he ended up getting drafted. I think he was undrafted, actually. But that was a little bit disappointing. But, he was an explosive player in special teams in college. He had multiple return touchdowns as a returner. And then I think that he plays very well, and he understands what he's doing. And we've seen 2 opportunities now, and he's played well there. They need to run the ball a little bit more, I think, against Buffalo than what they would have the past couple weeks. And so I think he's going to be the lead guy in that.
Yeah, I think so too. When I hear Robert Saleh say he's not going anywhere, that tells me that, what did he have last week? I don't remember, like 19 touches or something like that. So Matt Waldman of the Matt Waldman RSP, are you surprised to see Knight have this kind of ascent and play this well when given the opportunity?
No, and some guys usually yes, but with him, no. He was a guy that I've been recommending at Footballguys in the offseason. Is like, this is a guy you should monitor for the end of the season in case there's injuries, because he's probably going to overtake LaMichael Pirine. That was what I was saying back in May or June. So, the surprising part is that they were throwing him the football, because he was one of the best receivers. I thought he was the best route runner of the running backs in this class, but they're not using him in any sophisticated routes. But the fact that they're throwing him the ball tells you that they've seen enough to trust him already on the field in his first start or his first set of time. So, he's not, Bam makes you sound like you're 230. Right. He's really like below 210. So it's kind of interesting. And I joke that Robert Saleh, defensive coordinators, if your name has an onomatopoeic type of sound for a collision, then you're a defensive coordinator's dream for a running back, So this was the fact that he even has a nickname like that just makes him a smarter guy than the average running back. But on that end, no, I think that Michael Carter's a good runner between the tackles in his own right. So I do think there will be a split, but Carter will see more of the passing attempts. But I wouldn't be surprised the way that they go is that it's more of an even split and run pass in both ends of the spectrum for them than it being one guy does one thing more than the other.
Yeah, a little more interchangeable. And I'm just glad you're keeping the word onomatopoeia out there in circulation. I was saying to someone tonight, I think they used the word accoutrement. If the kids, I don't know if they take SATs anymore. How are we going to keep these words in circulation? There's a reason there are all these words.
Especially with literature classes. I mean, are there even literature classes anymore? I mean, I don't think we read anymore, right? So, I don't think so.
Yeah. We could have like the all onomatopoeia team, right? Yeah. I know we could do it. Someone out there needs to do that. I'm surprised that article hasn't been done yet. And I'm thinking and I'm also remembering Crash Davis from Bull Durham. Anyway, I love
Zonka should be like an onomatopoeia,
right? An honorable one.
Yeah. Slash Stewart there with your Steelers.
Yeah. This is good stuff. Okay, let's move on and I guess talk about a few other. I guess if we have to dig deeper, Matt, what do we think about Jeff Wilson with Raheem Mostert? There's that Chargers matchup, but there's also the fact that he retreated back to about 30% of the snaps and didn't really. They're one of the times I think that Tua missed him on a wheel route, but otherwise I think he had a drop and he stumbled. So it wasn't exactly a banner game for Jeff Wilson. I got another part of this that I just want to toss out there is I think this is going to be a really interesting personality test for Mike McDaniel, because why would you ever stop running the ball against the Chargers? Like, why? Especially if you have Miami's defense, which hasn't been that great. Like, why wouldn't you want to keep your defense on the sidelines, keep Justin Herbert on the sidelines, run the ball until they prove they can stop the run? Now, again, I think this is an interesting fork in the road for Mike McDaniel. If he goes that direction, we could see a game where everyone who plays either Dolphins back is happy. Do you think there's enough there to at least give Jeff Wilson some consideration now that he's ice cold?
Oh, I think it's going to be a running back party for Miami. I think they'll do a split. And the worst case scenario is that he goes with a hot hand and just says, you know what? Jeff Wilson started hotter than Mostert. Let's just keep riding Jeff Wilson because he's more than capable of doing that. But the thing with Mostert that makes him still appealing is even if that hot hand thing happens and then they put Mostert in because Wilson's just tired from running through the Chargers play after play after play, that still opens things up for Mostert to be that change of gear who just breaks his first 60, 70 yarder of the year. We haven't seen one yet. And, if we're going to go data on the data end of this, which I know, that sounds weird for me to talk about this, but is the idea that Adam Hartstead would often say with regression is that if you haven't seen a long run, if you haven't seen a touchdown yet, that people will often say, well, that player may be due if they're below the career average. Well, I think Raheem, that may translate to breakaway runs, and we have not seen a breakaway run from Raheem Mostert yet.
No,
and it's not like that he's gotten slower or anything. It's just that he hasn't had the opportunity yet, and Chargers may give him the best opportunity all year.
Yeah, I love Mostert's initial acceleration, the 0 to 50, facing the Chargers. There's nobody else that's totally standing out. Someone brought up James Cook in the chat room. Like, if you have James Cook, you're playing James Cook this week, and unless you just somehow went crazy. Oh, I got one for you, Jeff. I got one for you. What about Samaje Perine? And this is just more of a question. What are they going to do? Is Samaje Perine after what we've seen? Because he was the tone setter for that. He should have some sort of onomatopoeia name. What could we give to Samaje Perine? He was the motorboat. He was the original motorboat back. There's that. That's kind of onomatopoeia, right? What about Samaje Perine? The tugboat, yeah. What do we do with Samaje Perine? Do we give him a chance after what we saw him do? And he is facing Cleveland this week.
I would hope the Bengals do. We've seen Joe Mixon really struggled this year outside of that Carolina game. And, Perine brings different elements to the game that Mixon, I don't know. They're two different. They're very different type runners. And I think that you hit on it perfectly where Perine can be that tone setter for this offense and bring a level of physicality that we don't necessarily see out of Mixon all the time. Plus, he's polished in the pass game as well. And so I think, I don't know. We've seen this situation before, and so I'm hesitant to go in on him because how often have we seen the backup running back look good in 2 games, and then that starter's back in, that guy that's got the big contract that carries it, be the franchise guy, and that backup that has looked good just goes right back to the bench and gets forgotten about again. I mean, P. Ryan has played with Mixon. He's seen about 30% of the snaps when Mixon's there, but the role's been pretty small. And I do think that P. Ryan is the type of player that picks up steam as the game goes on. And he the fourth quarter, once he's been wearing on you for 3.5 quarters, and then it starts to really make a big difference. And that's kind of what we saw against the Chiefs there, when in the fourth quarter, especially winning time there, he was hammering guys and really setting the tone. But I'd love to see him grow in that role, but I'm hesitant to say that they're going to go right back to it, because we've just seen it in so many times across the NFL where the starter's back healthy. He's the starter. Let's go back with him.
Yeah, I think it was Jay Moyer from the Matt Waldman RSP family saying they should have a committee. They should have a committee. They really should. They could even go something like what Tampa is doing and have them interchangeable, basically, like what we were talking about with maybe what the Jets are going to do. Okay, I don't think it's real quick, Jeff, because you are doing the rankings. Any other Hail Mary running backs or running backs that only in week 14 in 2022 would I tell you to start this guy, but I'm telling you maybe you should think about starting this guy?
So I've got two names here that the most desperation possible. Mike Boone going up against Kansas City. We saw Mike Boone kind of play as that pass catching back in that Denver offense. And I don't know that I want any part of a Denver offense, but playing from behind, getting him back healthy a little bit. I wonder if there might be some PPR goodness there. And then the other name, Jordan Mason from the 49ers, where, Brock Purdy coming in there. I think they're going to want to rely on that short passing game, that run game more. We saw Mason hit 50 yards last week, brings that physicality and is a good complement to both McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel out of the backfield. I wonder if those guys, if Mason can fall into the end zone and get you a touchdown there, or if Mike Boone can get you some PPR in garbage time or kind of taking that pass catching back. But I mean, they're down my rankings, but those are desperation plays.
No, I think those are, you're looking for touches, and there'll be some touches there. Mason's interesting because, Tampa Bay's run defense is pretty tough. That being said, San Francisco with Brock Purdy, and they could have Tampa a little discombobulated. And then if Mason's the finisher, as he should be, because the way I'm looking at it is San Fran can control this game. They don't want Brock Purdy to throw the ball more than 20 times, 25 times. Now, that's the Trey Lance plan. And Trey Lance was going to be also running the ball 10, 12 times a game. Who's going to get those runs? That's Jordan Mason, I think. So Mason, and I love that really against their better instincts, Mason finally got an opportunity at the end of the game a couple of weeks ago and looked good when I think Kyle Shanahan pointed out, he looked good when the other team knew the run was coming. So finally, he got an opportunity. Really quick, Matt, give us the overview, the cliff notes on the RSP file on Brock Purdy.
Well, Purdy's Purdy's a player I actually got to do some consulting for pre-draft for his quarterback coach. And it's interesting because he's a guy who is actually very good in the pocket. That wasn't really what he was known for. People often said that he wasn't, but he was one of the best in managing the pocket with incremental movement, taking hits, being able to maintain a throwing position, to be able to fit it into tight zones. Everything that you saw on Sunday was really his game encapsulated, which is, good leverage in tight zones to be able to throw the receiver open or find the tight windows. He's willing to take the big hit. He can move around the pocket and avoid pressure. Any schemed play that you want him to do from center or from under shotgun, he's going to be able to do and execute it well. What you don't want is when he has to get outside the pocket and create on his own, because he doesn't have the velocity to throw the ball late. He doesn't have to throw the velocity to squeeze it in anywhere. And he, like Kirk Cousins, his eyes are a little too big for his stomach when it comes to seeing the meal out there that he thinks he wants. And his arm, another cliche, his body writes checks, or his mind writes checks that his body can't cash. And he'll try some throws that he shouldn't. But the thing is that he probably knows this because he's stuck to that roster and they like him. So as long as defenses are going to kind of squeeze the, turn the levers a little bit and say, we know we're going to discover that you can't do these things well, and we're going to force you into situations where you're going to have to either throw the ball away, take the sack, take the dump off, or move on. And as long as he does that, he's fine. If not, it's
Josh Johnson.
It's going to be Josh Johnson, because he's going to end up with a 3 or 4 interception day, and it'll be over for him.
I'm just happy that we are now officially in a universe where Josh Johnson could be a league winner. It's possible.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
I would love it.
I
I'm
think
here
that-
for it.
I think it'd be awesome because he's hung around the league so long and he's such a
Well,
good backup, and
He's-
it's just so
yeah.
unlikely.
He already knows the offense. He's been with the team already, and he's got the running. We saw him put up viable fantasy numbers recently. He was an original Draft Guys TV guy.
He's the Cedric Pierman of quarterbacks.
Yeah, and he was. I love revisiting this stuff because it's so long ago now that he was coached in college by none other than Jim Harbaugh.
That's
at
right.
University of San Diego, the Toreros, and we got to hear the exclusive story when we were out covering him that the reason Marshawn Lynch got moved to running back, they're cousins. The reason Marshawn Lynch got moved to running back from quarterback was because of Josh Johnson, his cousin. Because
he should be in the Hall of Fame just for that.
Just for that, right? Right? Isn't that awesome?
He's the reason Marshawn Lynch is Marshawn Lynch. That's what we could say.
Yeah, that was great. Hanging out with Marshawn Lynch just for a very brief time was just as awesome as you think it would be. Okay, let's move over to wide receiver. Jeff, what do we do with this whole Mike Williams thing? Are we inclined to give him another chance after the last time he played? He stepped out there, caught a pass, and said, yeah, it doesn't feel right. Is it enough to make us not want to play Josh Palmer? This is a great matchup. It should be a high-scoring game. It should be a game that forces Justin Herbert to throw the ball downfield. Or is there 1, 2, 0 viable choices here between Palmer and Mike Williams?
I'm comfortable with Palmer. I think we've seen enough out of Palmer, and I think this is a fantastic matchup. I expect points going back and forth. I'm comfortable with Palmer as that third wide receiver, and even if Williams is back, I expect that, I don't know, are they really going to open him up and Mike Williams is going to play 95% of the snaps? So I would be a little bit surprised on that. As for when it comes to putting Williams in your lineup, that's where I have hesitation. And I think that I'm at the point now, I need to see a full productive game out of him before I'm going to start him. Now, obviously the whole theme of this week is 6 buys, and that would be a scenario where you'd have the expectation of points and productivity out of that offense. But again, I'm just very hesitant going back to Williams, but Palmer has shown very, very well this year.
Yeah, I have Palmer as my wide receiver 26 and Williams as wide receiver 37. So that's about where I'm at with respect to and of course Keenan Allen has regained form. So you're not really worried about Keenan Allen. Are we worried about Juju Smith-Schuster, Matt? We've been waiting, it looked like for a few weeks, a second option other than Travis Kelce was finally emerging. Then Juju took that brutal concussion, hasn't quite been the same. Even with Sky Moore now not in the mix, even now Kadarius Toney could be back this week. Marcus Valdes-Scantling makes a play here and there. It looked like, especially on extended plays, Juju and Patrick Mahomes were getting on the same page. And that was a big part of how he was a fantasy star when he was with Pittsburgh. Kansas City going to Denver. Denver sometimes can tighten the screws a little bit on Mahomes. Is there anything there? Is there any blood in this stone?
There's possible blood in the stone. And part of the reason is that while Denver can have a very good pass defense, especially with its safeties, you also have to look at how they do, maybe against tight end play a little bit, and because Juju Smith-Schuster in role is a little bit more of a tight end. And when you look at players that the Broncos have faced, let me see if I can look at points allowed here with Denver. And really, when you look at it against tight ends, the Denver Broncos, in terms of, points allowed, they've, they're not great, but they've faced guys like Seattle's defense, Seattle's offense, Houston's offense, and not really any teams that have been known for tight end play other than Baltimore. And Baltimore, Mark Andrews had 7 targets, 4 for 53, and that was last week with mostly out without Lamar Jackson. Right. So if there's a player that I would say from that perspective, hey, let's give him a shot, I'd say Juju Smith-Schuster. But I'll suggest somebody that's only on 30% of teams in Yahoo leagues. DJ Chark.
Yeah.
DJ
Oh.
Chark is he's the headliner on this week's replacements, and 31%, and that was only that was as of 5 o'clock today, 4 o'clock today.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a bad ball catcher.
Mm-hmm.
He was also a bad hands technique catcher, which is very rare, but he's straightened up that technique enough, but that he can actually make plays the way that you'd want to see and limit those mistakes that are potentially there when you have bad technique. And Goff's playing well. Everyone's expecting Jameson Williams to take off. But the guy who's going to keep scoring points for them is the guy that knows the offense, who's been playing all year, or like who had all training camp with Jared Goff. And he had a touchdown in his debut back against the Bills. And then he had 98 yards last week. He's playing the Vikings, who are 31st in in passing defense. Yeah, you got to take DJ Chark all day long. Like, I would put him over Juju Smith-Schuster today. Yeah,
he's 23rd in my rankings. And yeah, I think that you definitely want to break all ties in favor of DJ Chark, or really in favor of. Here's what I'm here for, guys: the Lions winning out and going to the playoffs.
Yeah,
I mean, they have this game. And then I think next week they have. I want to make sure I get this correct. Next week they have the Jets, but then Carolina, Chicago, and Green Bay to close. So,
and the Jets are one set of quarterback mistakes away from being behind in that game. Because Mike White has played well, but again, there's a reason why he was in that depth chart, even if part of the reason was the Jets don't know their head from their behind in terms of evaluating quarterback talent. That might be a reason, but he wasn't so compelling the first time around that they were like, yeah, we need to start him.
Right.
I don't know if there'd be a better feel-good story than the Lions coming back from the dead, making the playoffs, and then turning around and having that Rams pick as the Rams limp to the finish line and kind of maybe, I don't know if you take a quarterback or if you declare Jared Goff as your franchise guy and you add a foundational piece to that front seven to go along with Aiden Hutchinson that you're really building around. But I think that would be fantastic.
Oh yeah, it's great. That trade, Brad Holmes just crushed that trade. Jared Goff's an asset.
Yes.
In 2 years, Jared Goff has become a salary dump to an asset. His salaries, I want to say his compensation is around $25 million next year. That's reasonable.
Maybe that knee biting coach isn't so dumb after all.
Right?
I don't know.
What I'm happiest about with the Lions' recent good fortune is that he won't get fired, because I was really worried about that because I think that there's a lot of great things about Dan Campbell. Some of them don't even have anything to do with coaching.
He was a victim of the school of the lunch school table in the media as well, and I'm glad that he's basically flipping them off just with his behavior.
Yeah, and he learned a lot from Sean Payton, from Sean Payton. I think that there's something to be said for just being around somebody and saying, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm going to learn, because I know that you know more than I do. You've been doing this longer than I have. You've accomplished more than I have. But I even remember when he was the interim coach for the Dolphins, and then when they were talking about the hunt for a permanent coach, they said, well, they're actually considering Campbell. They were surprised at how good he was, and it was scoffed at. This was like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years ago. Anyway, I love it. You got your Bills stuff in the background there, Jeff.
Yeah.
And we don't know the weather, so let's leave the weather variable out, because it is going to be nasty. It's December. It's Buffalo. With that aside, what about Gabriel Davis? What do you do if you got Gabriel Davis this week?
It's hard to sit him given the attachment to Josh Allen and given what we're dealing with right now. But I think when really you look at it, I think he's a limited player, that he's very good at stretching the field and attacking vertically. But they've asked him to be that wide receiver too, and they kind of had to figure out if he could do that or not. Ending the season last year with that 4-touchdown game against Kansas City, I think put him in that spot. But now they know. I think now they need to get a real second complementary wide receiver with Stephon Diggs, and then kind of use Davis more in that limited role moving forward. Right now, it's just a tough matchup. We've got weather. We don't know about weather. And then what I would imagine Sauce Gardner is going to shadow and go with Stephon Diggs, but still that Jets defense, that's where we really saw obviously the elbow injury from Josh Allen came out of that, but before that, even he was derailed by that defense. He was really struggling to read that defense, and so that's where I would have hesitation on Davis, just the boom bust. And I don't know if the boom is there this week, and so that kind of takes a lot of it out of it.
Yeah.
I think they're going to try to rely on the run game more. That's what they've been doing the last couple of weeks. And, they're kind of, you can see Josh Allen's not there. You watch the games and he's sailing a lot of throws high because he doesn't have the velocity that he normally would have. And so he's putting a little bit extra into it. He knows it. And so they're just trying to get through this stretch, win as many games as they can, because obviously they're in the number 1 seed right now. Run the ball, get Josh Allen back healthy, lock down that number 1 seed, and then go from there. But, it's just given the week, there's still that chance he's playing with Josh Allen, still can catch that touchdown. I don't feel good about him at all.
No, I don't either. I mean, I think we have that first game as a guidance that nothing's going to come easy for the Bills. I think you're right that it's time to establish the run. Okay, let's turn the page to tight end. I mean, 6 teams on bye. That just looks like any other week at tight end, Matt. Are we going to get cheeky with it this week?
Yes.
RSP? Yes. Go.
Yes, we are, because he's had 10 targets for, I believe, something like 98. Let's see. He basically from weeks 9 to 11, he had a 1-catch affair every week for between 31 to 48 yards. Okay. Barely averaged 1 target per more than 2 targets per game. The past 2 weeks, 5 targets, 3.5 catches, 51.5 yards. And with Burke suffering a concussion, still not practicing, Robert Woods agreed to restructure his contract, which tells you they said, look, take a pay cut or we're booting you because you're just not playing well enough for us to rely on you for starter money. So if that happens, that tells you that they need somebody who can stretch the field a little bit. And we know that Okonkwo can be a Delaney Walker type of threat. They'll probably use 2 tight ends because Austin Hooper's played well. 2 tight ends are very difficult for opposing defenses to match up against because it makes it very unpredictable. And it also aids, guess who? Yeah, King Henry. So as a result of that, you can do some things where you can put people out. And the Texans and the Cowboys, I know they face the Jaguars next, but I think that they can do pretty well with Okonkwo. They can find ways to target him. And even if he just winds up with maybe 2 more targets for another 10 to 15 yards, that's still pretty good considering what he's been averaging, even with just 2 targets a game. But if he gets 3 to 5 grabs a game and 70 to 80 yards, now you have a low-end tight end 1 or maybe a mid-range tight end 1 in today's environment. So, you got to go for that.
Yeah, I think so. Outside, here's my quick picture at tight end. I mean, someone brought up Dulcich in the chat. Dulcich is in.
I'm using Dulcich too. Yes.
Yeah, Dulcich is a top. Look, okay, so Kelsey, Andrews, Fairmouth, Everett, Kittle, Schultz, Hawkinson, Njoku, who's going to play. Probably Evan Ingram. I mean, he's out of his slumber now. He got that rib injury, slowed down a little bit. Got a touchdown last week against Detroit. So these are options that you're probably not scrounging around looking for somebody. And I think Dulcich pretty much qualifies there. And then I think Okonkwo is like right after that. I mean, I think that, and so he's like the top of the next group.
He and Otten.
Otten is right there too.
Jade Otten, because he's earned the trust of Brady, and Brady's starting to target him in the red zone. And so at that rate, even with Brate coming back, you see that Otten is getting his love, and that means that Brady trusts him. That's good.
Yeah,
Brate didn't play last week.
Right, he was a surprise scratch with an illness.
He was
back at practice the first 2 days. Today and yesterday, he got in a full practice. Although the computer report said they were doing some testing. I don't know what kind of testing they were doing, but whatever. Otten's the guy they try. It's been since like week 3 that Brate outsnapped Otten. Otten already took over the top tight end role on this team. It's the year of the rookie tight end in so much that we've had a lot of different rookie tight ends break through. Zari brought up Daniel Bellinger. I mean, that's another one. Daniel Bellinger have a line like last week, 5 catches for 25 yards.
He's doing what he did at San Diego State, which was basically run, play, action, get out into the flat, and get a few yards afterwards. That was his game.
Yeah, he's actually an important player for this offense, which shows you where they're at. And one other name I'll toss out there, Jeff, before we'll sign off with, I'll let you toss out any other desperation tight end. But if Hunter Henry is out there, it's Arizona. And I mean, sometimes it's like every year there's one matchup of tight end. We say, well, especially with Byron Murphy back, so that means the pass defense against wide receivers is going to be better. And Hunter Henry only takes one play. He actually had a big touchdown, long touchdown a couple of weeks ago. Didn't do much last week. But I have him just behind Otten and Okonkwo. Folks that are looking to the waiver wire for a tight end or otherwise starting a tight end that we had definitely did not expect to have to start. Jeff, any other name you can pull out of the air to maybe someone look back and say, that's why I made the playoffs, because I played this guy at tight end?
Maybe Isaiah Likely from Baltimore. We saw him. He was tight end 17 last week and kind of getting back in there, being that maybe potentially that secondary receiving option. And it seems like they're easing Mark Andrews back in a little bit. We know the rapport that Mark Andrews and Tyler Huntley has had in the past. If Tyler Huntley has that comfort just going to the tight end position, if you're really desperate, I think Likely's a guy that can pick you up 40, 50 yards and get into the end zone potentially. And I think, Hunter Henry hit it there too, but Arizona's absolutely terrible against the tight end. And so Juju Smith could enter the conversation as well, as the Patriots are looking for a spark in that passing game, in that offense, and using him a little bit more.
Yeah, it's funny. Hunter Henry's going to be out this week. You know who the backup tight end is for Cincinnati, Matt?
Yeah, Devin Asiasi.
Speaking of the old New England tight end.
Now, if you're gonna go for one that we're like, we should award a prize to somebody for starting this guy and seeing what happens, it should be Marcus Jones again.
Sure.
Because is he going to get another look against, with that speed in a role where maybe he can exploit the middle of that defense?
Yeah.
Can you start him in your league?
Right. Well, that's why you got to play IDP leagues, guys.
There you go.
I was just recounting for the IDP show guys. I love doing shows with them. The very first Dynasty league I did after becoming part of the fantasy football world was back in 2005, the initial draft. And I don't think I ever got up for an initial Dynasty draft as much as that very first one.
Oh,
it really felt like, wow, you're drafting these players for the rest of their careers.
Yeah.
Wow, this is big. This is important. Every single pick matters. And I broke the seal on IDPs. And the player I took to break the seal on IDP, so it's like the 6 or 7. This was a league, Matt, Dave Baker and Bob McGaw. I love Bob McGaw. Bob McGaw is
shout out to those two guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Julius Peppers, that was the guy. That shows you where we're at, because he was getting looks at tight end.
Yeah,
and then they kept committing pass interference. Every time they would try to throw the ball to Julius Peppers in the end zone, they would pull him down. And
that was better than me, because the guy I remember selecting the first time was a little before that, and that was John Henderson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, big John Henderson.
I think he might have been on my team, too, because, you need that defensive tackle production.
Yeah.
Get in. We do IDP blitz everyone. The IDP, if they just don't know John Norton, if they haven't tuned in to see John Norton on IDP blitz with his gun cabinet behind him, which is just the most it's John's. I was telling stories about John, picking up classic cars and bagging deer, like award-winning deer. He's a legend, and his IDP knowledge is second to none.
Listen, if you're not looking at IDP stuff at Football Guys, you're completely doing it ass backwards. I mean, John Norton, Aaron Rudnicki, Gary Davenport, we've been competing with for years and years, and now he's a part of what we do with that. I mean, if Gene Bramall came out of IDP retirement, no one would be able to ever touch what IDP does in the industry with Football Guys.
Yeah. Well, and it really quick, since we've gone there before we sign off here and watch the rest of this game. One of the main reasons to play IDP fantasy football, other than it just enriches the game, the more you understand about what you're looking at, just in terms of the players and their stories, but you can use your IDP fantasy football knowledge to help you when you set your lineups on the offensive side. You're up on injuries, you're up on trends. You absolutely understand a lot more about what happens, these stats that we compile on our offense side of the football. The defense is part of that story. And the more you know, and you know more by listening to Jeff Bell, who's going to be hanging out with Bob Harris tonight, which is awesome. Matt Waldman, Football Guys. We love you. And we love
feeling it.
Yeah. And we love this week 14. Matt, I was recounting earlier this week that used to be, I remember Cecil and I used to be at this point in the season, and because I think you joined the Audible, in like the third year. So you've been here for most of it. At this time of year, we almost felt like we could do whatever. Like 5 or 10%, 5 or 10% of the audience was watching or listening at that point, and those people were degenerates who didn't really even need advice.
We did just do about pretty much do whatever.
We definitely did.
Hour. And I think I was the instigator for half of those.
Yeah, and Gene too. Every now and then Gene would do something or say something, and then we'd get the giggles, and then we just couldn't stop.
Can I tell a quick story? It'll be short. Okay. The first time my wife, if my wife and my daughter who met Gene and Cecil was at the Senior Bowl a number of years ago. And, we know Cecil's personality on air. Cecil's personality is a little different off air, and it's a wonderful personality. It's just that he's a little quieter. He's a sweetheart. Yeah. And where he's an absolute sweetheart. And where Gene is more of a quiet instigator. So we all went out to eat. And, my wife and I have a relationship where it's kind of like two dogs trying to tug at a bone, and one puts the other in front of the other and says, here, and we like to play, argue, and give it back and forth to each other that way. And my daughter gets in on that act, obviously, as well. So we're all doing that. And the first thing that happens is they start giving me the business with Cecil and Gene there. And then they turn and give then I'm giving them the business, and then they give Cecil the business. And Cecil's a little bit like, he kind of has a deer in headlights look because he's just not quite sure what's going on here. And then they turn in on Gene, and Gene snaps right back at him. And they just broke up. And like at the end of that, I laughed because my daughter was like, yeah, I mean, like they both were like, we love Cecil, but they were like, we knew right away with Gene because he didn't take anything off of us for a second. He just was right back in that. He goes, yeah, it's like and Gene was like, yeah, it's like I'm at home already. So I was so Jen must give him the business all the time.
Oh, yeah. And his nickname for your wife, isn't it Pauline Mooney? Was that right?
Paulette Mooney.
Paul Mooney. Mooney, rest in peace.
Yeah.
He was a good one. Yes, folks. So we love it. And I just again want to say that the chat room, our family, that this many people are still hanging with us this late in the season. It didn't used to be like this, and it warms my heart. And I like to say, a lot of this job, I think, because of the way the fantasy football industry is that we're here. We're here not necessarily every single week on Thursday night, but we're here every day almost at Footballguys. For sure on the Footballguys YouTube channel, you're going to get new content almost every single day, and we're there. But also, y'all are there for us too. And it's a nice dynamic, a nice positive feedback loop. So let's keep that going all the way to the end of the season, maybe in the off season too. We like hanging out with you any time of year because you're so classy.